Hello, I'm Aidan The Hostile, real life Viking. I'm making this video because you had submitted questions for Dr. Gaynor's class, and I'm going to try to explain them and answer them the best I can. I think the first thing we're going to do is start off with weapons. Every good Viking likes his weapons. Uh, Zach S. writes, what weapons were used and how? Well, uh, let me just start off with the smallest ones. One of the things everyone carried around was a small knife like this called a sax. It was used for utilitarian purposes, cutting meat, eating, cutting rope, anything that you needed a small blade for. And pretty much you'd have that with you at all times. Moving up, you have what's referred to as a lang sax or a long sax. This blade was used for slightly larger tasks. You could chop wood with it or chop your enemies with it. It could be used for hunting, skinning, all kinds of other things. Another thing that was used quite often was an axe. This right here is a small hand axe, again for chopping wood or chopping shields. It is actually referred to as a bearded axe because it has a beard coming off the front of the blade. They were really good for catching shields, pulling shields forward in battle. There were longer versions of this, bigger, heavier versions of this that were made for warfare. Oftentimes, these smaller ones would have a longer beard on them and were used for shaping wood in the process of ship making. Another thing that us Vikings really were fond of was this thing over my shoulder here, which is a spear. They were used in hunting and they were also used in warfare. Another question that came in was, would you sell a sword or axe? I would say, for me personally, no, I wouldn't. I have these implements for the uses that they are needed for. If I was a blacksmith or a seller of blades, then yes, absolutely. That would be my job, the way I would make money. Another question was from Maggie D and Zach H. How were weapons made? Well, quite simply, the weapons were made by a blacksmith. Blacksmithing was something that every Iron Age culture had. The Vikings were no different. However, some of the Viking steels were more, I guess, stronger is a good word. The homelands where the Viking lives, up in Scandinavia, had a lot of peat. Peat is a dense, fibrous material that's kind of worked into the earth. And they would harvest this peat and heat their homes with it. They would burn it and heat it. They found, however, that there was a lot of iron ore and a lot of meteorite ore that was mixed in amongst it. And while they burned it, they came out with all this extra material and they used that to forge into blades. So the Viking steel was quite different than some of the other steels that were available across the continental Europe. Another question came out, and this is kind of off topic of the weapons, but has to do with tents. Maggie D asks, how do you make the tents? Well, the standard Viking tent was a wedge shape. So it's triangular, wedge shaped tent. It was made of canvas or hemp cloth, and typically they were used only whenever the Vikings were traveling. If they were traveling by boat, they would take the sail, pull the sail down, and either erect this structure on the deck of the boat using oars and whatnot as a framework for the A-frame structure that was in the tent, or if they were landed somewhere and they were making camp for the night, they would typically just use what they had, which was the sail and the oars, and they'd bring it ashore and make their camp there. If they were going to be settling down for a little bit of a longer period, not necessarily creating a town or a settlement, but just camping out for a week or 2 or 3, they would sometimes actually dig a hole in the ground and then put the tent on top of it. And this actually got them below ground level and actually helped keep them warmer and give them more space to move around. Hello, welcome back. This next set of questions revolves around hunting. Question comes in: how did the Vikings hunt and what did they use? Well, first of all, most Vikings that lived near the sea or close to water would fish. Fishing was a mainstay in their diet, and they would use nets and spears and hooks and poles in order to fish. They would get the fish, cut it, gut it, slice it up, and oftentimes would salt it in order to preserve it for later use. If they lived inland or had more of a varied diet, they would hunt game much like we do today. They, however, would use dogs and sometimes spears, like this spear right here, which is a boar spear. It has a long pointy spear end and then 2 crossbars to stop the boar from charging once the boar was stuck. They would use bow and arrow, and they would use slings. The slings were sort of like slingshots we knew today, but using a leather strap with a rock or some sort of projectile rolled up inside of it, swung around their head, and released. It took a lot of skill using that method to kill something, but for smaller game, it probably would have been more effective. Bow and arrow, spear, sling, they were probably the most often used tools for hunting game. Well, that is all the questions I have for this video. I hope you tune in to the next video where I'm going to be detailing some questions involving warfare and raiding that the Vikings participated in. So I hope to see you then. Thanks again.